Before we begin this week, we're going to take a look at our evangelism journey. As we know that each week you kind of have the plan going forward for this week. We're going to be looking at two areas of concern, so that my aim for our time today is not just to locate evangelism as our individual responsibility, and it certainly is that individual responsibility, but I wanted to encourage us that we can do evangelism in a hybrid world. So it's one thing to know it's in our responsibility, our Christian duty, but it's another thing to know that we can actually do it. And so that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. And then it's also important to appreciate that there may be limits that we need to recognize in order to be effective and to remain energized for this labor of love, so that we'll end up talking about some of those limits before our time ends tonight. All right, so those two areas, be it resolved, I can do it, and then knowing when enough is enough. Before we go too far down the road, let's check in from our work from last week, from last Thursday. So I want to know how it went. So let's see. Before I asked you last week to work on three things. One was to review the ways that you benefited from what we call the hybridization of things, to write your history with evangelism, and to begin thinking and being prayerful about whom you might share the gospel with. So obviously, we don't have time for everyone to say everything, but if you'd like to respond, I'd like to, hear from you, but I want to make sure we stay on track and allow for as many people to comment and share as would like. So if you're going to share, at least in this moment, I'm going to ask if you can limit your comments, your reflections to 1 minute. Hopefully that's enough time. We'll see where we are. So if anybody would care to kind of lead us and let us know where you are. How did you do? How did it go last week?
Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I have to be very honest here. The question that you asked, I really had to think about it, and in lieu of the teaching and classes, 1 minute, teachers and classes, everything. I think if you had led someone, if I had assisted in leading someone to accept the Lord, I would remember it, but I can't remember doing that. I've talked and shared, but I cannot say that. And I know we won't always know if somebody accepts the Lord, but I can't say that I did that. I don't know.
Wow, no, I appreciate your response and honesty there, Beltina. Hopefully that helps us all. I know it may not sound like it should be something that can help us, but I think that can help us. It's good to be honest about where we are and what we have or have maybe not done. So thank you for sharing that. And anything else? And again, we don't have to necessarily focus on that one part of so there's three parts. Remember, kind of write your history about evangelism and how you've been successful or not, and then begin to think about and being prayerful about who you might share the gospel with. And then the other part, or the first part really, was to review ways that you have benefited from from living now in a hybrid world. So anyone can respond and can take any of those three. Please feel free to share.
Oh, I'll very quickly say how I benefited from it.
Okay.
As we're out of town now, we're able to join the church, join the teaching, fellowship without being there. And if you hadn't asked and I didn't say, you wouldn't know. So it allows for you not to be at a single place, but you could be in different places and still continue to meet.
Yep.
That's how I benefit.
Appreciate it. Anyone else? Please share. Please share.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm looking at the time. I will only respond to maybe a couple of these. And of course, I was very ambitious when I wrote my essay about a time when someone evangelized me. And I'm not even going to attempt to read that at this time because it's at least 8 minutes long. And didn't know anything. I had a feeling there was a time restraint to this, and I should have found out about that before I sat here today and used up my energy.
Don't worry, you didn't waste it. It's no waste. So go ahead, though.
No,
I'll say more about that later.
Yeah, I'll do something with it somewhere. Believe me, God didn't give me this for nothing.
That's right.
But anyway, one of the things I like about the fact that sometimes we're in the building, sometimes we're not in the building, because of the technology. There are many times when my health is misbehaving, and I think that's even for a lot of our older members. When our health is not doing what we'd like for it to do, we don't have to travel. We can still sit at home and watch the services, and I think that's wonderful. And I do have a person that I would like to share the gospel with, someone in my own family. So I think I did all 3 parts. The only thing is I cannot share the magnificent essay with you at this time.
All right.
Thank you, Pastor.
Well, thank you. Let's see, maybe we could take one more. Anybody else want to share? All right. Well, if not, that's okay. Thank you for doing the work, and thank you for sharing what you did for Veltina and Deacon Smalling. And so, good point that to make, Deacon Smalling, about the time that it took, or the length of your quote unquote essay. The aim for that was to help us to remember what it was, what that experience, what it felt like, where we were, who did it, when it happened, get some of the fine details to help us to remember. One of the blessings that I think we don't often tap into when it comes to overcoming difficulties or challenges, or addressing things and conquering anxieties and nervousness, is the blessing of memory. And it's helpful just to reflect and to remind ourselves about how God was faithful in times past, even when it comes to things like sharing the gospel, whether it was someone that you witnessed to or someone that witnessed to you. There is a blessing in just remembering, what that felt like. Somebody may have been evangelized in the church basement, and I remember my church basement, the church we were growing up, the kitchen was down there. Y'all remember those kitchens? And you smelled the rolls, and all the desserts that were cooking, and the fried chicken, and you smelt that stuff. And that, there's a memory associated with that, and there's a feeling. And whenever you kind of start thinking about, that church basement, and then you start thinking about the red Kool-Aid and the people and all the experiences, that does something. And I think it helps us to think, not just think fondly of the experience, but maybe sometimes to even try to recreate the experience in some ways. Okay, so not that it has to be the same, but we can, in some ways, recreate the feeling. And I think that's something that can help us. And so if you wrote out your story, I pray, my prayer is that you started to smell that fried chicken in the church basement, and that helped you to think about ways that you can recreate that feeling again. All right. Now, it may not have been fried chicken for you, it may have been something else, but y'all are with me on there, I hope. Mm-hmm. All right. So the work for the week, again, is not only helpful to increase our understanding and enthusiasm for evangelism, but it's also a necessity. So the hope is that what we do between meetings will prepare us to engage in the realities of what it is to be hybrid. All right. So start with the first one, thinking about feelings, thinking about who we might be in conversation with, and the rest. And so we'll say more about this week's work for the week as we conclude our time today. If you're following along on the slides, you can flip over to slide number 4. This week, we're going to look at you and evangelism. You and evangelism. And last week, we spent some time defining evangelism. We heard, several definitions were offered and all of that. Whatever might promote or position us for evangelism. Ultimately, evangelism is to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I want to say that again. So whatever might promote or position us for evangelism. In other words, how can we be in position to then evangelize? And we talked about some of that last week. We talked about prayer, we talked about generosity, we talked about being kind and engaging with people, and there's a whole laundry list of things. And I said that those are things that we should do. They're all good and they're all worthy. And those things promote and they position us then to evangelize. So the question is, where do you fit in with all of that? As it relates to evangelizing in a hybrid world, you yourself, I suggest, may be more hybrid than you think. So it's not just the work of evangelism that's hybrid. You, my friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ, you, I think, are also hybrid. Okay. So let's look at this. Slide number 4, if you're there. Let's take I want to take a few minutes. If you've printed it out, great. If not, be thinking of how you might fill out the boxes here. All right. So we're not going to be able to complete the whole thing. So maybe just take 2 of the lines so that we want to figure out how we show up in ways that fit wherever we happen to be. Okay. So in other words, if I'm going to take family, I am a father, I am a husband, right? I'm also a brother, I'm a son, I'm an uncle, I'm a cousin, right? And I also have, other family relationships, right? So maybe that's how I see myself as it pertains to family. That's how I see myself. And then you can extend that further. I'm the one who, tries to connect people, right? So that's how I see myself. And then how I communicate as far as family is concerned. More often than not, my siblings and I, we text. More often than not, we text. I more often than not am the one to pick up the phone and call them before they will call me, but they text me before I would text them, right? My parents and I, we Zoom, right? So that's how I communicate. So I hope that helps to help you kind of get your juices flowing. I want you to take a few minutes just to fill in. Again, just take maybe 2 of them, and then you, after we finish our time today, you can do the rest. Let's see, how hybrid are you? Okay, what makes you hybrid? And then we'll come back and talk about it. It's 7:20 on my clocks. If I can give you till 7:23, and then we'll come back and talk about what you've done. All right. All right. Again, we're just taking a look, maybe 1 or 2 of the ways that you show up: family, employee, friend, church, community. And you can, as you're doing your thing, I'm just going to kind of talk. So kind of listen with one ear as you're doing your work. You can extend this list. This is obviously not everything. You may show up in other ways. You may have different kind of communities, if you will, different groups of people, associations perhaps, that you are a part of. And you can, make this list longer. And we're just going to try to figure out, you are a hybrid individual, and this might help us to determine how our being hybrid can help us to evangelize in a world that is increasingly hybrid. All right, I'm giving another minute, and then we'll see where we are. All right. All right. Of course, again, like I said, I understand you may not have finished the whole table. We're not anticipating that you would have done that in our time. But we'd love to hear maybe what a couple or more have to say. How do you see yourself? Let us know which line you decide to fill in, and then how you see yourself in that group and how you communicate with that group. Floor is open.
I'll take a stab at it, Pastor.
All right.
I didn't want to pick the same ones that you use as an example, family. So did you ask us to select 2 or 3?
Well, I said 2. Whatever you could do in the short time that we had is fine. You know, even if it's just 1, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take a stab at employee as well as community.
Okay.
And how I see myself is as an employer. And I just say that because we're having some work done here at the house, which are people that we have hired to do that work. So I see myself as an employer in that instance. So I wanted to just take that one just to use as an example. And as an employer, how I communicate is through just encouragement with those employees. As I see them doing the work that they're doing, I go to them and I let them know that they're doing a great job and how much I appreciate it. But I use that as an opportunity to evangelize to them as the opportunity comes up. And I say that because I had an instance where one of those employees was in the house, and we had a picture that I saw him staring at the picture. So after a while, he eventually said, well, what does that picture mean? And it was a picture of an individual that was at different levels at the Bible. First, he had his head down, laying in the Bible, and then in the same picture is showing his head coming up. And then in the same picture, he's still holding the Bible, but he's holding the Bible closer with his head lifted up. So that became an opportunity where his question was, what is that picture meaning? And I was able to explain to him that the picture was showing how we should be eating the word of the Bible, just trying to put it in a everyday term where he could follow the story that I was telling him, that you get into the Bible so much so that it becomes like a meal to you. And then the next level with him raising his head up a little bit was indicating that that individual was now letting meditating on that word and letting it get into him. And then the final stage where he had his head all the way up and still peering into the Bible, I explained was him allowing what he had written to change his mind, change the way that he was thinking. So out of that, the individual kind of indicated that they were a believer. But when I explained that to him, he indicated that that really makes a lot of sense. So I think I was able to meet that individual where he was and give him a good illustration of the picture. Mm-hmm. That's just an example of why I chose employee without being an employer.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you for
Community
sharing that. I'm sorry, you had another one. Go ahead.
Community, I kept that one. I'll keep that one short and sweet. And I see myself as a good neighbor. And, I do that in different ways with conversation with my neighbors, whether it's a wave or just stopping for a minute to say something funny to them, which is another means by which through the conversation we can take it further as I see that the opportunity opens itself up where I can share the gospel with that individual. But I certainly try to live in the community as an example of what I believe in. And I'll stop there.
All right. Well, good. Thank you, Deacon Murphy. Anyone else want to add? How do you see yourself? Give us one of the lines if you're able to.
This is Brother Evans. I like to see myself to my family, especially my kids and my grandkids, as a role model as far as every day. I send them out text scriptures every day, verse of the day, scripture every day they get, motivational encouragement for the daily chores during the day, and the crisis and the turmoil we in this world today with the virus situation. And I communicate them through texting and calling on the phone and keep in touch with them. They respond back, and they like those responses, and they feed off those responses. And also in the community, I see myself as my neighbor across the street is young man, is about the same age as my oldest son. And I give him encouragement, and he's a very fine young man with his family. I keep in touch with him and all my neighbors, and we chip in with cleaning up. If it snows, we clear out driveways and whatnot, check on each other very closely, knit, pick up mail for each other and whatnot. And I always see myself in a positive mode with the word of the Lord daily. And I communicate with texting with that, and also with voice, by word of mouth and voice. Mm-hmm. And so that's all I have for community and family.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. So let's remember from last week, we talked about what hybrid is, and that it refers to something that has or was produced by a combination of two or more distinct elements that usually serve the same purpose or that perform the same function, right? So two or more things coming together to help to produce or become something, right? And if we take that concept and apply it to us as individuals, take it, apply it to you as a person, what are the two or more things? What are the combinations that come together to produce who you are, right? So that's why I think, we are more hybrid than we have maybe even thought about. There's more to us than just a one thing, right? And then you can take any of the examples that you might want, family, employee, friend, member of church, community member, and just think about, how often you communicate with different people in different ways, right? Just take the parent-child relationship or the teacher-student relationship. You don't necessarily try to teach or raise every person the same way. right? Because every person is different. They need different kinds of attention, right? And I think it's helpful for us to recognize how flexible we can be and how flexible we have been, right? Not just flexible with the people, but we're flexible with the tools that we use to communicate with, right? You heard that in two different people just now, but you also heard both of these same people, Deacon Murphy and Robert, sharing how their communication differs. So they don't communicate the same, even if they're talking about the same person, right? The same way with all of us. Even if I'm talking about the same person every day, I don't necessarily communicate with that same person the same way, right? And if I do, it's helpful to note that there are alternatives, right? There are alternatives. So I encourage you to go ahead and fill out the rest of this when you get a chance to do so, because, I want us to get a sense that though you are a single person, that you function and you communicate based on the people that you are relating to at any given moment. Okay. You function and you communicate with people, and it can change based on the moment that you are in. Okay. I think that's one way to appreciate that we are more hybrid than we think, and that it is that part of you that God will use to evangelize in a hybrid world if we avail ourselves to it. Right? When we recognize how flexible we are, it's that God can use. Okay. Any questions, any comments about that so far? If not, Sheila, go to the next slide. All of that is to say this: you can do it. You can do it. Be it resolved, my dear brothers and sisters. You can do it. Sheila, are you with me? Are you frozen? All right. Let's keep on pushing. I know where we are. There we go. Hey, how about that? You're good. Go back up to. All right. All that to say this. There's a difference between me saying it and you believing it, right? I can say we can do it, but until you believe it, it's just me saying it. So we want to move to the point where you can do it. That's fine right there. Thank you. Is that number 6 that you're on? I think that's 6. Yeah, that's 6. All right. So let's look at what it might take for you to resolve within yourself that you can evangelize in a hybrid world. All right. So if I want to encourage you to make or reach for this resolution, what do you hear is the question. What do you hear when I say, trust the gospel to be enough? What do you hear? What's the first thing that came to mind or that comes to mind when you hear that? Trust the gospel to be enough.
It means that I don't have to create it. I don't have to modify it. It is what it is, and that's how you should share it. It says what it says.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Trust the gospel to be enough.
What came to my mind is you can do it, because you know the word of the gospel. You can do it. That's what came to my mind.
Good. Thank you. Other responses? I think this portion of our time here is probably one of the more important ones over the course of 7 weeks. Of course, we're going to talk about different tools and ways to use those tools to evangelize and all of that. We're going to get into all of that. But before we get into the resources, it's helpful to, work on us. And again, I told you that part of the whole enterprise here is to encourage you to appreciate how much empowerment you already have. The gospel is enough, right? And I say that because if you're going to evangelize, ultimately, you're going to have to point people to the gospel, right? Now, in my way of thinking, the overarching principle that will help our evangelism in a hybrid world is that we trust the gospel. So we talked about this a little bit last week, but just so you know, and have heard it several times, repetition, it does help. You've heard me talk about the gospel in the past, that you know that that I hold a high view of the gospel, and my high view of the gospel tends to resist the gospel being reduced to one singular event, right? The event of Calvary is the core, is the root, is the essence of the gospel message. So I don't ever, you never want to forget that. In fact, we want to make sure that at some point we get to that, right? The gospel is expansive, however, and it has everything also to do with the way Jesus was born. It has everything to do with the way he lived. It has everything to do with the manner and the meaning of his death. It has everything to do with the fact of his burial. He did die, right? He was buried in the grave. It has everything to do with the certainty of his resurrection. Just like it's a fact that he died and was buried, you got to believe it's a fact that God raised him from the grave, from the dead. And the gospel has everything to do with the mystery of his ascension, right? His body was not just stolen and he was whisked away somewhere, right? God called him and he raised, not just raised him from the grave, but he raised him from this world, and now he's seated in the heavens. And the gospel has everything to do with the hope of his return. I hope you see in that you can evangelize in a hybrid world because there are so many different avenues by which you can approach the message. Okay, if you accept the gospel as being the good news of everything that I just said, the fact of his birth, his life, his death, his burial, his resurrection, his ascension, and his return, if that's how you view the gospel, there are any number of avenues that you can take in order then to evangelize. Okay, the gospel is good news because it comes to people at a time and in a place where they needed to know that God could be with them. Hence, Jesus is born in this world. Okay, and then you can play that out over each one. For the sake of time, I don't want to get caught up there. So hope you understand there are any number of avenues that you can take to explore the message of the gospel with people, right? If someone is sick or they're in need of healing, you can talk about a Jesus who heals, and heals physically, but also heals spiritually. And then you can kind of start taking the angle toward the cross of Calvary, toward the shed blood, right? If you're talking to someone who is struggling with financial issues and being a good steward of their finances, or they're just, they're employed and aren't making enough money to, make ends meet, right? You can talk about a God and a Jesus. You can talk about a Jesus who shows people how to take care of one another in community and explain this may be one of the reasons why you should be connected to a group of people who love you, like the group of people at my church. You'll see how if your view of the gospel is expansive in that way, there are avenues that you can take in order to get to Calvary. All of this is good news, but it's the cross. It is the blood of Jesus that ultimately you want to get to. All right. So what you see on the screen here, these are my immediate thoughts. The gospel is enough, right? So how can this be the case for you? If you trust that the gospel is enough, these are just kind of some immediate thoughts that I had. The gospel, you can promote many ways that salvation can be realized while we live. And now I've put salvation in quotes, not to minimize salvation, but to help us to appreciate that salvation comes to different people in different ways. But that, let me clean that up. What I mean is we are saved by grace through faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, put a period there. The spiritual component, that'll be an earthly physical reality when the Lord returns. All right, we got that. People can also experience what it means to be saved while we live. All right, we talked about kind of the healing aspect. We talked about, good financial stewardship, that to relationships, salvation, right? This idea of salvation, I'm alive in lived experiences. And so hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. If you trust the gospel to be enough, I'm just going to that second to last one. Hybrid does not mean that anything goes. All right. When you talk about hybrid, again, it's a combination of two or more things that ultimately will produce an outcome or produce an element, or facilitate some change, perhaps. But that doesn't mean that anything goes. Right? There's just some things that, as it relates to evangelism, that we should not do. Hope you can agree with that. Hybrid does not have to mean hard. It doesn't have to mean hard. If we trust the gospel to be enough, there are many avenues and approaches that we can take in order to get to the gospel. And again, these are just my thoughts. Again, I want us to appreciate the idea that we can do it. We have what we need, and now it's up to us to do it. Any questions on that? Any comments? Any responses to what I've said? All right. If not, Sheila can go to the slide number 7. All right. When it comes to evangelism in a hybrid world, we also have to recognize that the world has changed. The world is changing even as we speak, and the world will continue to change. Change. This is the world, right? But change does not have to be a bad thing. As you know, there is much good that has come because of change, right? You remember how you used to be and how you've changed, and now you kind of okay with where you are. There's much good that comes with change, is what I want to say. But as the world around us changes, it is important to know that people who live in the world, they change too. Okay, just like you've changed, they have changed. So some of the ways that we do evangelism, some of the ways that we communicate, some of the ways that we show up in our various spaces, they also must change in order to meet the moment that we are in. And they also must change in order to meet and be appropriate for the resources that are at our disposal. So we're going to play that out much more next week. Start talking about kind of the resources and all of that. We're going to do much more of that next week. But before we end our time tonight, in light of the fact that things have changed, let's talk about how to know when enough is enough. We can flip over to the next slide. So enough is enough. Part of one of the major changes that I think we have experienced, and hopefully when I say we, hopefully what I mean is hopefully you have experienced it as well, is that attention spans really have changed dramatically. I don't know how far back we can go, but certainly just look at the last 2 years and how much shorter our attention span is now than it used to be. I think some of this has to do with the idea that much of what we've done has been on the screen, and not just church, but everything: work, school, learning, news, movies, and all that. We're on the screen, and physically, we're sometimes just not able to handle that as much, right? So our attention spans have changed. So with that, and that's what kind of prompted this, this slide here. We would do well to be aware of when we have done what we can in a given moment, and then bring the moment to a close. Okay, we do well to know that we've done what we can do, and then bring that moment safely to a close. And this is important. Just like when you fly on an airplane, you pray to God that you don't have to grip that armrest too tight, because you got a pilot who knows how to land the plane and give you as soft a landing as possible. This is what you want to try to do with evangelism. You don't want people to be gripping their armrests while you're trying to get to the close of your story. So if we are witnessing, whether it's in person, by way of email, by phone, through some other social media platform, by letter, whatever it is, the moment when enough is enough might look different from one platform, from one person to the next. So I want us to try to kind of home in on that. Let's see if we can name some of these things. So before things get completely sideways, before they get out of control, what are some of the signs to look out for? What are some of the signs that we should look out for? And then that's the first column that you see there. And then the second column, when we recognize the signs, what are some ways to respond that would help us to bring the conversation to an end? So this is open. Let's just talk about this. You can fill it in as we go. Feel free to unmute yourself. Let's talk about some of these signs. Again, you have in-person, email, phone. Just pick one and then kind of tell us how you want to fill that in.
When you're sharing on the phone, when you've written an email, and when you have posted something on social media and you have found out that you was unfriended by that person, that they hung up on you, that they also have blocked your email so that it goes to spam, that's when you know enough is enough. They're just not ready for what you got to say.
Sometimes they're just not ready. Hopefully it doesn't get to that. But you're right. If they start unfriending you and blocking your calls, yeah, that's a sign. But there may be something deeper there. That may not be the gospel's fault. That might be something else. You might want to explore that. You might have done something. Go ahead, Robertson.
Person to person, sometimes people say, well, I don't want to hear about that. Or I don't want to talk any further about it. You know enough is enough. You can safely close that conversation.
So help us there, Veltina, if you don't mind. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, I have had a person tell me that once. Well, I don't want to hear no more about that. I don't want to hear no more about that. To me, they're not ready to receive it. And I would say, well, why? What have I said that you don't want to hear? I don't want to hear no more God stuff. To me, that's telling me they're angry about something when they don't want to hear about God. And I'll say, well, are you saved? Yes, I'm saved, but I don't want to talk about God. I don't want to hear about it. That tells me they're angry. And I said, well, okay. Well, we'll talk another time when you feel like talking. And say, okay.
Yeah, that's good.
How I end it. I just end it just like that. Well, we'll talk when you feel like talking another time.
Yeah. Sometimes some probing questions, especially if you have a relationship with the person, some probing kind of follow-up questions might help to prepare for the next time, or it may give you an opportunity in that time where they say, well, I don't feel like talking about it. You just use your example and you do what you did, or do what you suggested, kind of, well, why not? What happened? Or, that might, even in that moment, change their mind about the fact that they do want to talk about it. They just haven't really had somebody to want to talk about it, right? So no, I think that's helpful. What else? What are some other signs?
Just telling us we need it. Well, if we're in person, also body language plays a part in it too. When you approach somebody and you're talking in their body language, and we're looking away and that no eye contact. That's a way of knowing that enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I
And then
respond to God, and I respond to God bless you, or have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day, whatever it may be, and move on. But body language is the quickest way. I mean, as far as know somebody interested, person to person.
Good. Yep. And it doesn't have to be anything personal, thank you for your time. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk. God bless you, like you said.
Right.
Yep. What else?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Deacon Hughes, I'm using different mics. My thing isn't working. It's coming in.
Are you close to a different device?
Yeah. Okay, I even lost it.
No, you're good now. Go ahead.
The point is, when people will tell you, I'll call you back, but you never receive the call. I'm busy now and I'll call you back. That's another.
Right.
Yeah. So what happens then in that case? What do you do?
But you never receive that call that they will call you back in 10 minutes, an hour or two.
Mm-hmm.
So if you keep giving you that excuse, that means I don't want to be bothered.
Mm-hmm. And then the response to that is?
Don't call them anymore.
Okay. That's one response.
Never receive the call. Don't call them.
Yeah. So I think the point here, well, not the point, but there's several things that to be said here. Obviously, not to be lost in all of this conversation is the idea that our relationship with people makes available to us, or it closes off from us opportunities to explore further, right? So we can't ask probing questions, or at least too many probing questions of a stranger, right? Somebody that we don't know. They might just be put off altogether, and you'll never win the opportunity again, right? If it's like a coworker, for example, it might be someone that, of course, there are different rules in workplaces, and especially like in school, if you're a teacher or you're just in a school building, there's some limits to what you can or cannot say and do and all of that. So, watch the signs and figure out if there's another opportunity, there's another place perhaps that you can engage further in conversation. Can you invite somebody to dinner in a neutral setting that may be more comfortable for that person to have this kind of conversation, right? And maybe it's just not inviting somebody for dinner. Maybe it's just getting on their calendar to have a conversation about something like this. And I know that sounds kind of strange. Why would I want to schedule time? Because people have lives, right? People have things to do. And increasingly, especially what I'm finding is if it's not on the calendar, if I'm not even thinking about scheduling it, one, it's not probably going to get done when it needs to get done. And then two, I don't hold it as something as important for me because it didn't make my calendar. If it's on the calendar, chances are pretty good I'm going to do that thing, right? So maybe it's just, hey, love to talk to you about, whatever it is. Can we set some time? Right. And of course, you don't want to blindside them. So you do need to give them at least a heads up that you do want to have a conversation about, some spiritual things. Again, the avenue that you take will be dependent upon where they are. Use that avenue to get to where you ultimately want to get to. But the key here is, what is the relationship that you enjoy with the individual? If there is no relationship, how can you end the conversation in a way that leaves the door open for the possibility for a relationship? And we don't have to be best friends. It's just something that you want to, can we be cordial the next time we see each other? Okay. So again, this table take some time between now and next week, fill that in, and really give some thought to how this can happen. Again, we're going to use some resources next week and kind of build on what we were talking about so far. Look at that quote in the bottom left of the screen there, and then we'll end our time. If the gospel is not viewed as good news of salvation that has overcome the bad news of sin, then it's hard to convince anyone of their need to believe the gospel and be saved. Okay. If we don't know why the good news is necessary, then it's hard to convince people that the good news is necessary. You get it? The good news exists for a reason. And more often than not, it's the opposite of the bad news. So sometimes starting with the bad news is a way to get to the good news. And I'll just leave that with you tonight. Okay. Next week, your work for the week. Work for the week. Go on to the next one, Sheila. All right. Here's our work for the week. You see it listed there. There's a link in the second one where it says read. There's a link to a website. It's an article that I would like for you to read. We're going to start with that next week. We're going to start with that article next week, again, just to kind of follow up and see what your thoughts are. Don't feel like, let me say this, don't feel like you have to subscribe to the website. When you go to that website, I should have, well, it's kind of hard to put it. Let me think here. Let me think. If you received the email, open up the PowerPoint attachment, and you should be able to just click on that link and go to the website. All right. There's too long for me just to type out all the letters and stuff. If you got the email, click on that link and go to the website directly to that link. Let me say this though, when you get to the link, there's going to be a couple of pop-up windows. One of them will ask you if you want to subscribe to that website. Another one is going to ask you if you want to do something else or have some kind of consultation or something like that. You don't have to subscribe to anything. You don't have to give your information to anything. You don't have to accept anything. If you don't want any of that, there's going to be a little X that will pop up next to the box. Just tap that little X and it will disappear. Okay. I want you to know that this is a safe website to go to, but there will be something that pops up on you when you get there. All right. So don't be surprised by that. It's a very helpful website that will help us to be looking ahead towards digital evangelism methods. All right. Of course, it says you should use these in 2021, but these are also good for 2022. So we're going to be looking at that next week. And the others are listed there for you to look at.